Assalamu alaikum, Khawateen Hasrat. Waseem Ahsan welcomes you to lecture number 36 of Marketing for Nonprofits, MKT728 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. The component of learning is going to be evolution of cost marketing. The reason we need to understand the evolution, how the whole thing started, is going to be very beneficial while we try to understand the promotional side of this particular concept, which characterizes cooperation between a nonprofit organization and a commercial entity. And therefore, we need to look into all those phases cost marketing has gone through. It basically has gone through with the 4 different stages, which I'm going to talk about one by one. But in order to have a clear understanding of all those 4 stages, we need to understand the basic premise on which cost marketing really rests. We know that there are basically 3 entities that really matter toward this kind of a relationship, this kind of marketing setup. Okay, the one is the stakeholders for whom everything is done, meaning the clients, and the body of stakeholders comprises a lot many more kind of constituents. We know it is traders from the commercial side, it is employees from that side, and then we have shareholders from that particular side. And then from the nonprofit side, we have there's so many stakeholders like influencers, activists, we have volunteers. Again, you see the staff members of the nonprofit organizations. So this particular the body of stakeholders, if we call it one entity, is really huge. And then we have 2 important entities known as nonprofit sector and then the commercial sector. And we also know that there is something that we call intersection of interests. In other words, until the time we can really define that intersection, we cannot really go ahead with concept and cost marketing relationship, which is based on partnership and passion and profitability. Profitability for all, not just the financial profits, but also reputation and achievement of mission when it comes to the nonprofit in particular. So coming back to this intersection of interests, we have to understand this basic premise that there is a commonality of interests on the part of the 3 entities that I've talked about, meaning the stakeholders, the nonprofits, and the commercial sector. Their interests do not overlap by 100%. There's no way. It cannot be that way. So in other words, I'm not talking about congruence. I'm talking about commonality of a certain portion of interests where they overlap each other. And that is a very small portion. And I would like to take you back to one of the previous components when I talked about this the particular concept. And you will recall that it is a very small triangle of intersection of interests toward which the whole concept revolves. And we also know that the 2 important sides that bring their actions together, meaning the commercial entity, a commercial organization, and a nonprofit organization, both benefit a lot out of the cost marketing relationship. It may not be out of place to mention here that the commercial organization benefits a lot in terms of improving their bottom line. They generate value for their shareholders, and they are in a position to prove that they are responsible corporate citizens, and that they can motivate their employees, and so on and so forth. Conversely, on the nonprofit side, we have a lot many benefits to gain from this kind of a relationship. We are also in a position to motivate our employees, and we bring a lot of legitimacy to our programs when we join hands with a corporation. Of course, we generally join hands with a corporation that has very strong brands, out of which, the one is a partner with us. Mostly it is one of the brands if the corporation happens to be a multi the brand organization. Uh, then you see that we have the benefit of learning the corporate the way of operating, which was not the case with non-profit organizations. If we go back by, say, 3 to 4 decades, and that is in terms of any historical perspective, is not that far back. That is recent. So, in other words, non-profit organizations gain a lot from this kind of a relationship because they learn the corporate practices of the corporations who are their partners. And then you see they are in position to develop loyalty for the programs they are offering. So there are so many different benefits enjoyed by both the entities. The crux here is that with this interaction, they create what you call a value exchange. And it is that value exchange which is important to understand if we are going to have a good insight into the evolution of cause marketing. How is it that something which started on a short term basis as the short term promotions, in other words, joining of hands, between the nonprofits and commercial organizations has now grown into something so strategic that organizations and the corporations from the commercial side consider this kind of a potential relationship as part of their overall programs, business programs from the commercial perspective, and the nonprofit programs from the NPO's perspective. So what I'm saying is that cost marketing has now become a part of the overall corporate strategic framework if a corporation really is concerned about all those values that people harbor very close to themselves and for which they think that the corporate sector also has to play a role. I'm going to talk about this particular factor when I am explaining these phases in a sequence. So let us talk about the very first phase, which is known as the sales phase, with the understanding that we are fully aware of the value exchange, which basically is creation of shareholders' value on the commercial side, as well as addressing the societal values on the other side, meaning the non-profit side. So, in order to gain this exchange or gain the total benefits of this exchange, I'm going to talk about the very first phase of the cost marketing that started back in the late, rather early 80s. It was in 1981, to be very precise, that one of the American banks started this concept by joining hands with the nonprofit sector, which was few museums and art organizations. So, in other words, the bank was concerned about their values, which were to preserve their heritage in terms of the art and in terms of whatever their museums contained. And the interesting part of the whole thing is that this campaign started on a very regional basis. In one part of the United States, this campaign was started as the kind of a test thing, and it gained so much popularity among the bank that started it and among the nonprofit sector that it became national in the year 1983. So, how the campaign worked is what I am going to explain because that puts in a very proper perspective how two different entities can join hands together in order to do something which is characterized by common objectives or commonalities or value exchange. The bank decided to donate a certain amount, which was very small in terms of cents, I think just a couple of cents, on every use of the card toward those art organizations and museums. So, in other words, whenever a card holder made a transaction on the basis of that particular card, a couple of cents went toward the way of the nonprofit or the nonprofits that were trying to preserve as a mission the art and whatever you see their museums contained in those days. Other organizations followed suit, and it became kind of a national trend. Many commercial organizations joined hands with nonprofit organizations for different causes, and they benefited themselves, meaning the commercial sector, and also the clients on the other side that were addressed by nonprofit organizations. The interesting part of this collaboration was that the initiator was the commercial side, the commercial organization, and nonprofit organizations were the passive part, for the simple reason that nonprofit organizations in those days did not really have the marketing sophistication and the knowledge to put all these things together the way commercial side was in a position to do so. So the initiators that took advantage of the situation. They approached so many different NPOs and they went ahead with the cause of the marketing concept. But like I said earlier, the promotions were short-term and they existed for a couple of months or a few months, and then they were over. And then you see all over again, they would sit together and talk about things which they thought would be better if they took a long-term perspective of those things. And this is how you see things that started evolving. But before I start talking about the next phase, let me say here that it was the time when government funding was declining in the US, and there was a realization on part of the general public that private sector, or for that matter, huge corporations, at least, they should be in a position to help the general public in terms of so many different social causes. And they should be the ones to uh, do something on the financial side. This is what people expected. And therefore, the corporate sector they became very sensitive to this particular vacuum, and they started joining hands with nonprofit organizations to carry out such campaigns. And what happened in the process was that the intersection of interest got strengthened and strengthened. How? Because whenever they carried out this kind of a campaign, it connected so many different constituents. And this is how you have to understand the evolution, the way it took place. And those constituents, where you see the traders on the side of the commercial sector and their customers or consumers of consumer items, they knew what was going on, and they bought more and more of those products because they knew that a certain portion of the money they pay for buying that particular product would go toward a social cause, which is a good thing to do. And therefore, you see, those constituents came together. And it was not confined just to traders and consumers. It was, you see, all the members of the supply chain, and it also was the shareholders on the commercial side. And then, of course, you see all the stakeholders on the nonprofit side. So this is how you see the power of connections among different constituents presented itself and strengthened the very premise of intersection of interests that I talked about to begin with. And it is because of this particular development that the sales phase came into being. Now, it became obvious that consumers played a very important role in the sales phase because everything boils down to selling. And the more you sell of a product, and if you happen to be tied with a cause, the more you donate toward that cause, and the more is the level of awareness among the general public that a particular commercial organization, XYZ, so to say, is involved in this particular cause, and hence it strengthens customer or consumer loyalty. When the commercial side got aware of this particular factor more and more, they wanted to get into this the kind of a cause partnership with more and more. And this is how the next phase of consumer loyalty set in. And the fact is that this is the phase that prompted the commercial sector to join hands with the NPOs in a more comprehensive way. So, in other words, they wanted to go a step further from the short term promotions to something which could have been taken into a higher level of strategic framework. And this higher level of strategic framework, see, was all about the marketing planning and marketing strategies on part of the commercial sector, and of course also on part of the non-profit sector. Because as and when the commercial sector became more and more involved, it educated the other sector, i.e. the non-profit sector. And the non-profit sector also improved its marketing savvy. And this is how things improved further more and more. And the fact is that this particular phase gave rise to the concept of the customer centeredness, because the commercial organizations were very sensitive to this particular point, that the customers would switch their brands from the one that is not tied with a cause to the one that is tied with a cause. And therefore, customer centeredness took the center stage. And that set the ball rolling for nonprofit organizations as well. And they also became more and more customer centered, because they knew unless they would put together their programs with the customer taking the center stage, they will not be in a position to join hands with the commercial side, because competition also has started creeping into this particular concept. There could have been so many different nonprofit organizations wanting to join hands with the commercial sector, or those corporations that wanted to be in this particular exercise. And by the same token, there would have been a lot many corporate sector organizations that wanted to join hands with one particular cause. There are certain causes, and there have been certain social causes very close to the body's chest, because people sympathize with those causes, like the cancer, like the cause for the kidneys. And by the same token, there are so many other diseases and ailments for which nonprofit organizations have been working on. And therefore, the corporate sector really wanted to be very choosy in terms of joining hands with those nonprofits that really would publicize their existence, and publicize their existence as a, a corporation that was tied with that particular cause. Let me take you back to the example of that Pakistani bank that has gotten into a cost marketing relationship with a nonprofit hospital, rather a chain of hospitals for eye treatment. You and I know that cardholders accumulate reward points, and those points get on accumulating as and when cardholders use their cards. So the more you use, the more points you accumulate. And the more points you have, the higher is the level of redemption. The meaning, if you have a very high level of points, you can get in return for those points something very attractive by way of having a consumer appliance, the consumer electrical appliance, so to say, or a nice looking ballpoint pen, or a mobile telephone, so on and so forth. But then you see that you also have the opportunity of donating those points toward this particular cause, which happens to be very noble and which is being addressed by the chain of hospitals I just talked about. So instead of getting a ballpoint pen, you tell the bank that they divert those points toward that cause. So depending on the mechanism of relationship between the bank and that hospital, you, as a matter of fact, finance one operation of cataract by donating a certain number of points. This is a very noble cause, and anybody donating points toward that becomes more loyal toward the product that he's using. And the product in this particular case happens to be the credit card. Here, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this campaign exposes itself at a time and point when cardholders are weighing their options in terms of redeeming their aggregate points. And aggregate points basically implies that they may have taken a long time to get to that point. So, in other words, it is kind of a long-term relationship between the bank and the nonprofit organization. The cardholders could just happen to be one of the constituents. So in other words, we are talking about a campaign which happens to be long term. It may take one particular customer 6 months to a year, or maybe a couple of years to get to that point where he is in a position to donate toward that cause. So this is a phase which is different in terms of longevity as compared to the sales phase, which is characterized by the short-term promotions and short-term collaborations. So when we talk about the long-term relationships between the nonprofit organizations and the commercial organizations, we basically talk about all those connections and relationships between and among different constituents of the nonprofit organizations and also the commercial organizations. So in other words, in this particular context, we are talking about different kinds of retailers where you use your card. We are talking about different kinds of restaurants, and we are talking about different kinds of places, any places where that credit card is usable. So it is the connections of constituents which take place and which last for a long time, making everybody aware of the campaign and making everybody loyal to the cause. So it is not just the ultimate card holder who's going to use that card, and depending upon the points he aggregates or she aggregates, the campaign is going to be an effective campaign. It, as a matter of fact, signifies the constituents that work together and work to see on a long haul basis that becomes the basis of customer loyalty. This is the point that I'm trying to drive home. Now, talking about the importance of these constituents, here we can say the net result of the whole exercise is that there's going to be more funding because the people are more loyal. It is not just those customers who happen to be the card holders, it is all the constituents who contribute toward the cause by um, doing their part. For example, a retailer where the card is being used can suggest you that particular card by motivating you into its use. And therefore, we can say that it may lead to, or rather, it can lead to a higher level of funding because it results in a higher use of that particular card. And then you see that we can talk about better visibility of different the constituents who are part of the whole exercise. And when they are the more visible and they become more important the part of the whole equation, they become more enthusiastic in making their contributions. And then you see, we know that businesses as well as the non-profit organizations are in a position to fulfill their respective objectives. And we know what those are: profitability on one side and then achievement of the mission on the other. So these are the kind of net results which we achieve by having a very well integrated the marketing constituents when we are talking about a long-term campaign. And a long-term campaign is undertaken from the standpoint of generating consumer loyalty. And consumer loyalty is generated when we have these kind of relationships. So these are kind of intertwined and interrelated kind of factors which we call the integrated marketing, and that is something which leads toward customer loyalty. I would like to point out one important development that took place during this phase, and that is about awakening on part of the nonprofits that they also could have been the ones to take initiative of getting into cause marketing partnerships. In other words, they thought it is not just the privilege of the commercial sector that a cost marketing collaboration should be initiated by that particular sector. It is something that can be initiated by us. And we can do that from a position of strength. And I think that goes without saying that those nonprofits that had the very strong institutional brands were in a position to do so. The basic reason was the customer loyalty. It was because of the customer loyalty and a realization on part of the customers that they wanted to see commercial organizations get more and more involved into social causes. And therefore, the nonprofit sector tried to capitalize on that. They thought it is the weakness of the customers, and that can become our point of strength. and therefore we should be the ones to drive this kind of a relationship. And we all know that particularly in the US in those days, which was the 1990s, in the reference of this particular phase, that two-thirds of the customers opted for those organizations' brands that were tied with cost marketing programs in one way or the other. And almost a similar percentage showed their willingness to switch brands if they found out that there was a brand that was tied with cost marketing. So, looking at these impressive numbers, um, we all should think that the corporate sector did not have a choice but to get into cost marketing relationships. And it was smart on part of the nonprofit sector to take the lead into these kind of relationships, knowing the findings of marketing research in terms of consumer preferences. I mean, if the consumers could have wanted to go for something which was tied with a particular cause, then all the more reason for the nonprofit sector to start feeling kind of strong. And gone were the days when the nonprofits were the underdogs and they always waited for the commercial sector to come to them with a proposal of a cost marketing program. There are a few different strengths which are generated because of the customer loyalty. And I think we should take a look at by this very simple graphical presentation. As you can see from here, customer is right in the center. So we can say that this is a customer-centered approach, and it is marketing integration, which basically is a spin-off of the customer-centeredness. And then you see a higher level of fundraising, and then you see connectivity of different stakeholders along with fulfillment of social and the business objectives of all those who are involved. Customer loyalty and its spin-off took the thinking to the next logical level, which we call the branding phase. In this particular phase, the relationships were not really confined to the long-term relationships, whereby they collaborated and they worked on certain promotions the month after month and year after year. Rather, they thought of thinking which was more strategic, and the corporate sector in particular thought of integrating social programs into their marketing framework. So, in other words, they tried to integrate different social programs into their marketing programs and branded their companies very much tied to those social programs so that their commercial names were highlighted as those names who really were concerned about a social cause. So this phase became even more interesting than the customer loyalty phase. And there were so many different companies that integrated the social causes into their programs, of which the one happens to be a company that was into jeans manufacturing, the jeans that the you people wear. I would like to give you this example only because it is going to make it very clear as to what the branding phase did for cost marketing relationships. Um, this company thought of a very noble cause which was all about some form of, or rather one particular form of cancer. And they thought that they should do something to generate funds that could be diverted toward that particular cause. And that particular cause was being looked after by a huge nonprofit organization in the United States. The company opted for this particular cause because they were really concerned about the particular ailment which afflicted so many people in the society. And at the same time, they had their commercial objectives because there was a lot of competition in those days in the marketplace. And in order to um, stand out and to be different from the rest of the crowd, the company thought it had to do something which was different. And what else could have been better than joining a nonprofit organization and serving a cause which will be highlighted and come into the notice of all those consumers and customers who are very sensitive toward helping such noble causes. So the company decided that on every sale of one pair of jeans, $5 extra would be donated toward that particular cause. And the promotion will start on a day which was celebrated by the non-profit organization in that country in relation to that particular cause. So the promotion was kicked off with a lot of fanfare, and the sales as a result of the campaign really soared, and a lot more funding was diverted toward that particular cause. And to cut the long story short, this campaign went on year after year for a certain period of time, as was the agreement between the jeans manufacturer and the non-profit organization. I'm giving you the story in a very brief manner, only to arouse your own imagination in terms of joining a cause with a the commercial enterprise. So there could be so many different the possibilities and options whereby two different sectors can come together working on a cause which works to the benefit of the two partners. Here, it goes without saying that the manufacturer wanted to differentiate its product from its competitors, because everybody was producing a similar kind of a product, and by tying its product with a non-profit organization's product, which was the cause, the company really highlighted its brand name. And that really brought a lot of customer loyalty to that the particular brand. And the rest was what I just talked about as the part of the customer loyalty phase. The next phase into which marketing people thought that they should get into has been even more strategic, because the point came when they thought that it is not just the marketing plans which should be integrated between the commercial sector and the nonprofit sector. The whole exercise has got to be integrated in a way that overall business of the commercial side and overall nonprofit the program on the NPO's side are integrated. And they are integrated in a way that all the resources from both sides and all the constituents from both sides are really involved into it. Now, this is not to say that these constituents, have not been involved, or are not being involved when we take a look at the customer loyalty phase or the branding phase. But the point to be emphasized here is an increase or an elevation of strategic thinking on part of both the commercial sector as well as the nonprofit sector. The corporate sector thought that cost marketing could offer them a public face of corporate citizenship. And the fact is, the same has happened. Many corporations are in a position to prove that they are responsible corporate citizenships. And it is that particular standpoint that they are integrating into their overall business strategy. Here you see it is the overall business strategy and not just marketing plans. Different social programs of the nonprofit organizations, because they understand customers' the preferences, and they know that by highlighting these programs as a co-branding exercise or any other events that they undertake jointly are the ones which will put up that face of corporate citizenship. And like I said earlier, that precisely is the way it is happening. So in other words, when corporations they become so well integrated into in terms of different programs, i.e., commercial programs from the commercial side and uh, non-profit programs from the NPO side, they definitely highlight a few factors like a very active leadership role and added value, multifaceted support, very strong and sophisticated brand positioning, and employees' commitment. all these factors are the net results of the strategic um, alignment and the collaborations between the commercial sector and the nonprofit sector. And it is because of that particular reason that you need to have very active leadership uh, on the commercial side and as well as on the nonprofit side. Two leaderships that really can integrate their programs in a very aggressive and comprehensive way because they have to undertake the co-branding programs, events from time to time, and undertake all those exercises that are mutually beneficial for the two organizations and at the same time for all the constituents associated with the two sides, i.e., the commercial side and the nonprofit side. Let me summarize the four phases very quickly for your benefit. Um, the evolution started with the sales phase, which was all about selling more and more so that more proceeds could be diverted toward the cause. And this exercise, this kind of exercise, consisted basically of short-term campaigns. This phase was characterized from that standpoint as a short-term promotional um, campaign phase. This gave rise to the next phase, which was all about customer loyalty. And upon this realization that customer loyalty is not just something which brings customers back to buy something on the commercial side, but this can be something which can be used on the nonprofit side as well. The benefit of the loyalty can be translated into strengths on part of the nonprofits. And when those strengths are put together with the strengths of the commercial sector, both stand to gain. That basically is the summary of this particular concept. And when they gain, everybody associated with them gains. So customer loyalty being something in the center stage gave further rise to the next phase, which was all about the branding. Now, here you see, I'm not talking about branding a certain program, but about branding a social cause and integrating that cause into the marketing planning of the commercial enterprise was all about this phase. So, in other words, the nonprofit brand got integrated into the marketing plan of the commercial enterprise. And by that happening, the commercial enterprise's brand became even stronger because it was tied with the cause and the cause brand. This phase automatically gave rise to the final phase, which we find ourselves in today, and the one that is known as corporate responsibility phase. Uh, a couple of developments were responsible for this particular phase, and in particular, the scandals that hit the corporate sector in the US at the turn of the century. The corporate sector found it essential for themselves to prove good corporate citizens, and joining hands with noble cause was one of the best answers they had at that time. And therefore, they got into relationships which were kind of all encompassing and which were characterized by a very strategic outlook of the total program of the corporate enterprise and then integrating into it the cause program. And one more factor which we must not lose sight of that really helped transition to this the particular phase was the customers' awareness as a result of decreasing governmental funding to the nonprofit sector. Customers thought that this is something that must be looked after by the commercial sector. So you can well imagine the power of the customer in terms of his or her loyalty with a certain product, and then also with their with different the kinds of the social causes. And therefore, the corporate responsibility phase has come into being, as a result of which different functions, events, and co-branding programs are undertaken by the cause partners. Here, As the part of the summary, I would like to throw light on the one particular factor, and that is as this the evolution took place, the one phase was dominated by the other, but it was not altogether rejected. It is not something which was discarded. As a matter of fact, it was quite an overlap because the fact of the matter is, if you come to think of it, that it boils down to improving sales of the commercial products so that more funding could be generated for the social cause. And when that happens, a lot of things can happen at the same time. And those are the things that I've talked about in detail. And therefore, we can say that all phases have been extremely important. And at any given point in time, even today, for that matter, if we are to carry out this kind of an exercise in cause partnership, we may have to do things, which essentially belong to phase one, because we are trying to improve sales. And then at the same time, we must be doing something that belong to the branding phase, or we may be doing things which also belong to the corporate responsibility phase, only because the corporate partner wants to have that kind of visibility among all the stakeholders, meaning of being socially responsible entity. So this is an important dimension of the evolution that has to be kept in mind, meaning the overlap at every phase and at every phase, and it is the collection of all that we draw on different dimensions, which from the theoretical historical standpoint, we can say they belong to that particular phase or that particular phase. We can say, in other words, that each phase added a new dimension to the previous phase, thereby adding to the overall cumulative experience and knowledge on which we can draw any time, regardless of what the phase was in reference to the time frame. Yet, in other words, we can say, as an example, if a corporation wants to prove that it happens to be socially responsible, and it has joined hands with a non-profit organization because it shares the same values which public at large does, it may still have to draw on the experience and knowledge of the sales phase, which happens to be the very first phase of the evolution, or for that matter, the history of cost marketing. Because the corporation has to do something with improvement of sales, thereby being able to generate more and more funds in order to donate more and more toward the cause. So this is an example of all the phases being very relevant even today, um, in light of your strategic moves that you are going to take as partners.